Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Irene Kendig, and I'm going to let her introduce herself because she can explain it better than I can because it's not your near-death experience story today. So, hi,
Well,
Irene. Would you
thank
like to
you,
introduce
Peggy.
yourself for me?
I would love to, and thank you for having me on your program. Um, so my name is Irene Kendig, and I'm the author of Conversations with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead. And I've given many talks at the International Association for Near-Death Studies and to various chapters throughout the country. And people who have had near-death experiences resonate very much with the book. And just to share with you, because you are an NDE channel, because you have an NDE channel, I want to just share with you something that someone said about the book. And this was Chaplain Dick Dinges, who's at the Fellowship of the Inner Light in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And he endorsed the book by saying, as I read Conversations with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead, I began marking important passages. Then I began underlying passages of exceptional clarity. I soon realized I was marking nearly every page because nearly every page provided new and clear understandings. I have been studying near-death experiences for 15 years and gaining bits of information about life beyond the physical. Each NDE is like a thread. Then I read Jerry's description of life beyond, and I saw the tapestry. That's the real significance for me. I feel like a study of NDE is unnecessary any longer because I have the whole picture. This is the best book I've ever read.
Oh,
That was so
Dick
great.
was a guest recently.
Yes, I know he was. And he also offered me the opportunity and awakened in me again the desire to want to talk about the book and the importance of the messages that come through. But let me tell you a little bit about how the book came to be, because it really came as a surprise. It was 2006, and I had just started a master's program in spiritual psychology. And I got a call from a friend of mine, Cinda. And Cinda called to ask if I would be willing to do a session with a medium. She said this friend of hers had this gift that she could connect with people on the other side, and she wanted to make this her life's work. And she, there wasn't anybody I really wanted to speak to be perfectly frank. But she said, Cinda said she wouldn't charge anything. She would just want you to tell other people if you thought she was the real deal. So I agreed to the session. And I was sitting in my home office, and I had my little dog Scooter on one side and a pad of paper and a pen on the other. And we connected by phone. She was in Indiana, I was in Virginia. And she asked for the name of someone. And I gave her the name of my mom, Biba. It was a nickname that my son had given her. And she began describing Biba in a very clear description of her. But then she said, did Biba like playing cards? Because she's playing cards and she's laughing. She says she's winning. Now, as soon as she said that, I'm telling you, there was a knowing that she had connected with my mom. My mom used to practically greet me at the door with a deck of cards, and some of our most profound conversations took place over games of gin rummy. So, and she was very competitive. The fact that she said that she was winning and laughing, it was just so her. And we proceeded to engage with my mother. I was so dumbfounded. She asked me, she says, does this sound like your mom? And I actually nodded my head, and I was on the phone. So of course she couldn't see me, but I was like, my jaw dropped. And then she connected me with 3 more people during that call. When I hung up the phone, and I get chills now because when I hung up the phone, I danced around my house, I don't know, a couple of hours, because while I had always believed we go on, and I was 95% sure, this shifted it to a deep knowing that we go on. was no longer a thinking, it was a knowing. And there was such freedom in that. So I called and scheduled a second session, and that one was equally powerful. And at the end of that session, I asked Jana if she would be interested in collaborating on a book. And she said yes. So we agreed to meet 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. And it ended up taking 2 years to write the book. We didn't know when we began that it would be a 2-year project, but indeed it was. I couldn't wait to get to my office every day because the information that was coming through was so exciting and transformative, and I was so curious. I've always had a curiosity about life and death. And we pair life and death. We say it's a question of life or death. But the truth is that life is not the opposite of death. Life has no opposite. Life just is. Birth is the opposite of death. So this physical world reality has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It begins with birth, it has a middle, and then it ends with death of the physical body. But who we are is clearly not the physical body. And so what ended up happening was that 7 loved ones came forward in service to sharing their experience of releasing their last breath on earth. And in fact, I talked with, these 7 people were very, very different in their beliefs, in the way that they died, in the way that they lived. And that's what I was really interested in finding out. Like, what were the things that were unique to each individual? And what were the things that we might all expect to experience? So Jerry was a man of God. He was a minister. He had an experience of God consciousness as a kid, and he was 9 years old, and he went on in service to God as a minister. In the last 6 weeks of his life, he was ordained as a Buddhist priest. Jared was 30 years old. He was my son's best friend, and he had had some back injuries and surgeries that had resulted in him being on a morphine pump, and he was in tremendous pain and incontinent, and it was really a painful experience for him. So he gives his perspective, his sharing of what happened. My mother thought that there would be nothing after she died. And so each person brings a unique perspective and a set of beliefs in terms of where they were in relation to life. So I thought I might share with you a couple of examples of the answers to that question, which I pose to each and every one of my loved ones. And each one takes me on a different journey. So Jerry, what did you experience when you released your last breath on earth? I kept breathing, but my body wasn't responding. My release was gentle. I practically melted out of my body. I felt cold just before losing consciousness in my physical body, and then warm again as I transitioned into non-physical form. It was different from feeling warmed by an outside source, because this warmth came from within. I was surprised that I kept breathing. I thought breathing was limited to the physical body. You kept breathing? It surprised me too. Breath is a function of life, and the nature of life is expansion. It's the nature of life to expand itself into greater and more creative versions of itself. What are you breathing in? Life force, pure potential. It's the raw material of creation, the fuel for the manifest result of thought. On a non-physical level, breathing isn't for the purpose of maintaining the spirited body. It serves the purpose of connection. Inhalation is receiving the oneness, and exhalation is giving back to the oneness. It's a unifying process. Now, contrast that. Isn't that amazing? I never, ever in a million years would have thought of the possibility that we would keep breathing. So that came as a real surprise.
And the words raw material creation.
The raw
Powerful.
material. Yeah. Yes. Now contrast that with what Jared experienced when he released his last breath on earth. Jared says, I was shot out of my body like a bullet out of a gun, but I was ready. I was chomping at the bit to be released. I'd been miserable for a long time. Was it painful? No, there was no pain. It felt like my physical body blew me out like an air gun. I didn't have any regrets about leaving my physical body. I was done with it. As I hovered 3 or 4 feet above it, I noticed how sickly it was in contrast to how good I felt. Better than I'd felt in a long time. I'd been in terrible pain just seconds before. My physical face looked peaceful, and I thought my body wasn't the cause of the pain. It was me experiencing my body that was the cause. Without me, it can't experience pain or anything else for that matter. I am the experience. I suddenly got that I was responsible for everything that had gone on with my body. And then he goes on, I'll just share a little bit more. He said, I thought it odd that my mother was weeping, but I understood that from her perspective, I was my body. I felt her sadness, but not through my body. I felt it in the air. I realized the air was like a membrane connecting us. What she was feeling was being sent to me through this membrane, and I was feeling it like it was mine. When I realized I didn't need a physical body to receive her emotions, I thought that maybe I never had. I became aware of my connection to everything, and then I became aware of everyone in the room. So he speaks of this membrane that connects us, and when we speak of the oneness of life, and he's sharing about how he could feel his mother's feelings, that there is no separation. While there is individuation in physical world reality, we are so deeply connected. And this is
Confirms my drowning NDE, because I looked down and watched him and I felt all their emotions.
Yeah. And he's the only one that talks about this membrane. That it's that yeah, so it's interesting. Now Biba, who's my mom, I'll just share with her what she said when she experienced her last breath. She said, I'd been sleeping. I awoke disoriented and I couldn't place where I was. The colors were different, defined and radiant, so I thought I was dreaming, but it was so real. I felt self-conscious and embarrassed when I realized family members were present. I was accustomed to being in control of my surroundings, and I had no memory of how I got where I was. And where were you? I was at my funeral, overwhelmed by the love coming from everyone and wondering whether I deserved it. I felt someone kiss me on the cheek. It was my mother. I looked into her eyes and felt like a little girl again. She told me what had happened, and I remembered a scene with family members standing around my body. So each one so unique, isn't it? Do you have any questions or thoughts about that?
Right ahead. I was just thinking about, my mother passed in April and I didn't go to they didn't have a funeral, they had a burial, and I just was wondering if she was there and like, why isn't Peggy here? Or my brother John didn't go, why is it? It was just, my mind drifted as you said that.
Yes. Well, I can tell you that everything is in divine order, first of all. Right? You know that. Nothing happens by accident. It is all such a beautiful choreography. I was working with a client. I'm a soul-centered coach, and I was working with a client who had been caring for his dad when his dad was dying. And he had left to go run some errands, and his dad transitioned while he was away doing errands. And he was just riddled with guilt that, he had done something wrong, that he should have been there for, his father's last breath. And I said, did you ever consider that your father waited for you to leave so that he could transition? Because that's what my Aunt Paula did. She said that she had been, she had been so strong within the family. She was the matriarch of the family, and she didn't want her family members to see her as vulnerable, and she perceived the transitioning process as one of vulnerability. So she wanted to be remembered as always having been strong. So she transitioned in the middle of the night while no one was there. So we all, you know, all of these things arrive as a divine choreography. I can't even say that we choose. I don't even know if there is choice or if it's just life arising, because on one level, it really feels like if you asked me, who are you? I would say, I am now. I am all that's arising now, and there's no separation between any of it. It's all here now, and I'm the capacity. I am the openness for what is arising. It's my job to welcome it, to welcome everything, even the pain, to welcome everything and to know that it's all a blessing. That's how much the book changed me, because I used to be like, I would have a feeling, for example, and I'd say, well, I should be feeling that way, you know, and what that does is it blocks the energy, because emotions are just energy in motion. And so my judgment of what I should or shouldn't be feeling, what was right, what was appropriate, what's not appropriate, you can see it's all conceptual. And in that world of judgment, it blocks the energy. And since then, I have learned, as a result of the conversations, to welcome what's arising, you know, that these feelings just want to be recognized. These parts of ourselves just want to be seen, heard, recognized, and then they just let go. They just surrender. So it's a lot more fluid and living life. And that leaves me much more open to the fluidity of life and of wisdom and of guidance, of all that flows when we're not blocking it, because that's the natural way, isn't it? It's the natural way that there is flow, unless we block it. Yeah.
Both of my NDEs I experienced, I could be really upset all of a sudden about something, and then it was just like, take a breath, exhale, it's gone. Like a wave, come in and roar and peak and then out.
Because you were open to allowing it, right?
It was just like, I felt taken from me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, exactly. The power of that is so incredible. I wish we could teach that to children, right? From the very beginning. Let the feelings flow. They're not who you are. They're just moving through you. Just love them, acknowledge them, and they just keep going. They don't stick around.
Yeah, and we can here, you know, we can just get into something and hold on to it. And there it was just, it could be just as strong, and actually stronger. I remember thinking back to my drowning, because I was just 5 years old, and I'm thinking, my gosh, I had anger like a grown man would have. At 5 years old, I never felt that kind of rage, but this rage built up when I looked down as I'm hovering above the pond and see my brother on the board that he took from me that caused me to drown, just carelessly doing his laps on it, which he didn't need it, and I drowned without it. And I felt this rage. And then it was just like, exhale, you know, it's like gone, just washed away. And then I went on to the next thought. And I felt this jealousy. I looked down and I see my mom and my sister on a bed sheet, and they hadn't even noticed I was dead. What had noticed I was missing. But what I felt was their closeness. I felt a mature female conversation. And I thought, I'll never be old enough to have that with my mom, like my sister has. And I felt this sadness, and kind of a jealousy of my sister. I will never be able to talk to my mom or relate to her in an older level than, you know, this 5-year-old kid. And I felt this sadness, and then I washed away. Then that's when I learned the anger about my brother, when I looked on the other side of the pond. But yeah, it was just woof, gone.
Now, you know what you're describing, Peggy, is really what's available here now. And that's the power for me of this book, is that, yes, there's a lot about the afterlife. For example, there's a lot about what they experienced and what they've moved on to, but their reflections of what they've learned have qualitatively change my life and the way I experience life. So what you just described as a near-death experience of the emotions flowing fluidly and then going on to the next thing, which is how a child experiences emotions, because they're fluid. They don't yet have the conceptual
Yeah, they may need to take a
capacity
nap
judge.
first.
Right. But this is why welcoming whatever is arising, which is now an ongoing, it started off as a practice for me, and now it's really just more of an ongoing way of being, of everything that I'm recognizing, whether it's an emotion, whether it's a symptom, a physical symptom, whatever's arising in consciousness, it's all a blessing. There's nothing that's not. And so to be able to welcome, to let go of the judgments and the conditioning, it's not that I let go of it, it's that the conditioning began to fall away and fall away and fall away until, instead of living in conceptual mind, there's a freedom of beingness that is transparent. And it was a process for me, but what you described is exactly the way it's possible to live, where the feelings just move through without attachment. It's only when we think that our feelings mean something about us and we judge them, that's when we get stuck, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it means something, like I'm bad for thinking that thought. Well, guess what? Thoughts just arise. You don't create your thoughts. Heck, if I created my thoughts, they would all be beautifully pleasant. But we know that's not the case. Thoughts arise in consciousness. I'm the consciousness in which thoughts arise, but I'm not my thoughts. And so that was a huge shift in consciousness for me. Heaven is here now. Heaven is always available, and it's here now. And to do an inquiry, to begin to inquire as to, if heaven is here now, what is it that I'm putting in the way of it? How do I inquire into the nature of who I am in such a way that I access what few people perhaps access on their time on earth? Because conditioning is so strong and we tend to stay so stuck in our judgments and there's so much freedom available, and heaven really is here now. And it takes some work it takes work, because you have to be willing to surrender what no longer serves. Judgment, for example, came up a lot in the book. How do we deal with judgment? Bill, who committed suicide, talks about how he judged since he was a kid, that if he felt his feelings and expressed his feelings, he was somehow going to be called a weakling, that he would be, not a strong person, but he would be a weakling if he expressed his feelings. So he judged them as bad. He didn't want to be seen as
Yeah, how many dads say, suck it up, boy?
Exactly. Exactly. And then that becomes a conditioning until later that person just stops feeling and is blocked. Then that results in physical illness. Why? Because there's stuck energy, emotional energy. Emotional stuck energy leads to physical symptom.
And all the wives out there telling their husbands, talk to me. And they don't know how.
They don't know how. Yes, we need to become, and to teach our children to show them that it's safe to receive them when they're sharing their feelings. Actually, it's not even so much as a teaching as it is a modeling, that it's safe. It's safe to share feelings. It's okay. They move through, and that keeps you healthy.
I had a child say to me recently, nobody loves me. And I turned and I said, oh, that's not true. And I walked on, and I've been kicking myself that that's all I did. Oh, that's all I said. I didn't sit down and take the time and look in the eyes and say, Tell me why you feel that way.
Let me add another twist to that. That happened in divine order. Perhaps that's all that child needed to hear in that moment. But maybe moving forward, you would do it differently next time.
Yeah.
Because
Actually,
you
I remember
learned something.
I did say, that's not true. Everyone loves you. I remember that's what I said.
And, you know, we are being breathed. We are being breathed. Notice that you have no control over the breathing. It happens naturally. What you say sometimes, it's, you know, it's a flow, and it meets, you know, two people meeting, and it's a moment. And, you know, one of the things that I learned to do and practice regularly is letting go of regret. And what I do with regret is I say everything happened in divine order. I know that's true. Everything's happening exactly as it needs to. He didn't need to hear the rest of that. Why? Because I didn't say it. How can I know that he needed to hear more than that? I can't know that. So I'm not going to beat myself up over or criticize myself for what I said. I'm going to trust that what I said was what I said, it was appropriate, and what would I say now in a different moment of time with different circumstances? Because, you know, we walk around, there are stressors that are affecting us that impact how available we are. You know, there's a lot of stress going on these days. And so rather than, again, judging ourselves for what we did or didn't do, to say it's all happening in divine order, I did my very best. Now, in a different situation, what might I add to that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that today earlier, and I thought, you know, we're going to start being more available for that child.
What might you add today? I'm curious. What would you say today if that child said, nobody loves me?
I just would tell him how special everyone sees him. And that people that were teasing him, that made him feel that way, the other kids, that they didn't do it because they don't love him. They were playing and they were being cruel. And maybe he needs to talk to them about how he feels when they tease him, and let them know that that makes him feel like he's not loved. Just help him express himself to the people that were making him feel that way.
Mm-hmm. And the people who were teasing him may not have the capacity to hear him also.
Yeah.
They may ridicule him also for expressing his feelings. And so I think what's arising here is, you know, when we're kids, we're always looking to the outside to know that we're loved. We're always looking to the externals, aren't we? We look to the externals. That's just the nature of childhood. You know, and it's at the exclusion of what other people are experiencing. Like when we're kids, we just know that what we're experiencing is the reality, but you know, we don't contrast that with what others are experiencing because we don't have the capacity yet to contrast. We don't even have the conceptual understanding, the cognitive ability until age 7 to start to reason. Prior to that, we're not reasoning. And so not conceptually, not cognitively. So how would you equip him in that situation? And, you know, when one of the things that I do, I don't say I surrender. I say I am surrender. And so I surrender, like, for example, this situation, I surrender it to, I may not know what is best. I know I'm doing my best. I know I have an intention to serve that young child. And so I surrender for the wisdom to come through that's appropriate for that child too, you know? And so my initials are IDK. I don't know. And I'll tell you what, I don't know. I just don't know. But I do know one thing. I don't know a lot about a lot of things, but I know one thing. And I know I know this, what I am, is beyond all conceptual knowing, and that I can only be it. That I can only be it. It's like this peace that passeth understanding, this eternal that has no boundaries, this, it's not a thing, it's whatever's arising in this space, it allows for that. It is all accepting, and I am that. I am. And that just involves surrendering everything that I think I know, and coming down to kind of just beingness, just being present with what is, and being willing to be uncomfortable or welcome sadness or welcome joy, because the truth is that if there is only God, if God is ever present, and we could use a lot of different words for God. We could use the, this divine intelligence, this divine, all that is. So if it's all that is, if this is divinity, there is no outside to it. There is no exterior. There is no boundary to it. It is ever present. It means it's always here. It means if I'm not accessing it, I'm looking the wrong way.
Right.
Do you meditate? Do you like to meditate?
No, I pray to God.
Okay, another form, right? Prayer, meditation. One of the things I never meditated, but one of the things that arose just the other day, I was talking to my brother because he's never meditated, and I said to him, a lot of people have the wrong idea about meditation. They think it's about getting somewhere. It's about quieting your mind and getting somewhere where you don't have thoughts anymore, or when you're just in bliss. And I said, that's totally erroneous. What meditation is, it's a relaxing into what's here now, just as it is, with whatever is here. So if thoughts are racing, I'm the space for it. I'm just going to allow that. Why? That's meditation. It's resting. It's resting in what's here now, as what's here. And I said, that's a totally different, it's a sinking into what's here, not about going anywhere, about being present now. What is it like being you right now? That's meditation.
For me, prayer is like sending out an email to the universe, the powers that be of the universe, to God, and it's sending an email because it's going to be a while before you get your answer. It might be the next morning, it might be days later, it might be months later, but there will be a return answer.
I hear you. I hear you. And I just want to share something that brings up for me. When you said there'll be a delay. Well, I just have to say this because I had this experience Saturday morning. So Saturday morning, so I went to a wellness center for a week because I've been a caregiver for my husband for the last 3 years. It's been a rough 3 years physically for him. And I really needed this break. And I went to this wellness center. And at this wellness center, when I went there, I told my husband, I had a person here at the house caring for him. And I said, I won't be talking with you this week I'm not going to be texting. I'm going to see you Sunday night. I'm leaving Monday morning. I'm going to see you Sunday night. I'm going to disconnect from my duties as wife, from my responsibilities. I'm going to disconnect as a mom. I'm not going to take calls. Please, kids, please honor. This is a week of self-care.
We're on strike.
Oh my God, I'd never had that. I have never had that in my adult life, Peggy. So there was this week of self-care. And I have a relationship to exercise, which is, I hate it. I hate exercise. My mother used to lay in bed. That was her favorite thing to do, was to lay in bed. And boy, oh boy, did she model that well. And so I was like, I don't like to exercise. Well, I went there. And in that rediscovering of myself, I found that I was enjoying exercise. And there was this woman in the gym, a staff person, who was so filled with fun, and she was just so joyful. And there were like 9 of us in the gym at one time in the morning, and there was an 11-year-old and a 78-year-old and everybody in between. And I started to love doing exercise. And then we would go on some hikes, and I love hiking and walking. Well, when I came home, I started just naturally getting up out of bed and taking a mile walk every morning since I came back. It's been 10 days. And then I got a squat machine, and I started doing squats, and I loved them because they had a squat machine in the gym, and I just started really enjoying it. So I go buy the squat machine, I put it in the kitchen, and I go by and spend a minute or two doing squats. And suddenly I'm 71 and I'm feeling so alive and physically fit. Well, guess what? Those squats that I did, I was doing them down to the ground. My tush was touching the kitchen floor, basically on the seat. So I was really squatting down, really enjoying it. But I got to tell you, I woke up Saturday morning and I went to move my leg, and I was like, oh, excruciating pain. I just went, oh my gosh. And I was afraid to actually put any weight on my knee, and I put my feet on the floor, and I hobbled to the kitchen, and I got a cold wrap, and I put it on my knee. I wrapped my knee. I went back to bed, I wrapped my knee, and I took 2 curcumin, which are anti-inflammatories, turmeric curcumin supplement. And I took 2 of those, and I went back to bed. And as I'm lying there, Peggy, with this wrap, something happens. It's like a thought bubble. And in this thought bubble, there's this communication taking place. And I'm knowing, there's part of me that knows that this cannot be healed instantly. There's a part of me that's very sure of that. But there's a bigger part that comes forward that isn't so sure, because remember, my initials are IDK, I don't know. And that part came forward too. And then there was something of a negotiation. There was a class that I was supposed to take in 2020 that was shut down because of COVID. It was a healing class. And something arose. Again, I'm not my thoughts and I don't control my thoughts, but the thought that arose was, okay, if this is healed instantly, I will take it as a sign that I need to take that class in Boston, which I really didn't want to do. I didn't want to schlep to Boston, but I said I would do that. And when I took that cold wrap off, 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, healed. Now, how is that possible? I don't know, but guess what? I'm taking my mile-long walks every morning, and I didn't have an ounce of pain after that. One other thing that happened, if I might share with you, is that when I was at this wellness center, we did a yoga session, and I haven't done yoga in years. I only touched upon it decades ago. I wasn't even, very diligent with it. But we were doing these poses, and first we started with chanting, then we were doing these poses, and then the yoga teacher, she invited us to just lie back into a guided meditation, into a meditation. And when I just lied back, this ever-present, awareing presence arose. And I'd been having acid reflux for 3 months, couldn't get rid of it. No matter what I did, it wasn't going away. And in this space that arose, the acid reflux arose. They both arose. And this that accepts everything, that is all knowing, all accepting, all loving, just welcomed it, just received it. And the acidity dissolved. And I knew in that moment that a healing had occurred. And then the message arose. You need to release the pain of your childhood. It was the regurgitating of my childhood over and over to try and heal it that was causing my body the regurgitation of acid. And I have not had a moment of acid reflux since that happened.
How do you release your childhood?
Well, I've been doing a lot of, well, first of all, in that moment, I said, surrendered. I don't know. Surrendered. Now, I've been doing a lot of healing of trauma. I've spent a lot of time doing healing, and I'm grateful for all the healing I've done. But this was a message of, okay, you're done with that. You're done. Let it go. And what I saw was there was nobody to blame anymore for my childhood. I couldn't hold anybody accountable anymore. Where do you assign blame? At what point do you attribute cause? There's a flow happening. It's integral. It's whole. At what point do you say this was the cause of that? I can't do that anymore. I just can't. And so what I saw was that everybody was off the hook. You know, a lot of the book is about self-forgiveness. And when we judge that others should have responded, you know, when I was judging my parents, they should have reacted differently. They should have been more loving. They should have been more understanding. But guess what? They weren't. They didn't have the capacity. They couldn't. They didn't have the capacity. It wasn't that they didn't want to. It wasn't within their means. They didn't have the capacity. They were the result of their own childhood wounds. We all do the best we can with what we have, you know, but when we let our caregivers and our family off the hook, and we just say, this is what I got to work with. Now, I would say I was pretty neglected as a kid, pretty neglected. Well, what did that lead to? It led to a lot of independence. I am incredibly independent. My mom tells me in one of the conversations that I came in seeking love, but it was a love I needed to find within myself. And so she couldn't give me the love that I needed to find within myself. And as a result of not finding it outside myself, I had to go within to find it, as do we all. We all have to go within to find the love that is there. And we just have to work at letting the conditioning go, we're conditioned to believe that we're not worthy, that we're less than, that there's something wrong with us. We all have some variation of that theme. And depending on how much you let it run your life, right, is what you're going to what's going to be manifest in your life and through you. So to be able to forgive myself for judging somebody else, thinking I know more than I do. How do I know that they should be able to give me what I need? Who said? And so what I started practicing with self-forgiveness, I would put my hand on my heart. When I was judging someone or judging myself, I would put my hands on my heart and I would say, I forgive myself for thinking that I know more than I do. And I'm calling back this judgment like a do-over in a, baseball game. When you're a kid, you play a game of ball and you hit the ball in direction you don't want it to go and you say, do-over, can I have a do-over? We know about do-overs, don't we, Peggy? And so in the do-over, you just say, I'm calling that back. I thought I knew more than I did. I don't. I don't know why this is happening the way it is, but I'm going to release that judgment. And when that's released, what's left is this all-abiding presence that's ever present. Starts to move from the background to the foreground, and then pretty soon there's no background or foreground. It just is. And it's arising. And we all have access to our divine nature, which is what that is. And in this lifetime, we don't have to wait to get to heaven. And there is no place called heaven. Heaven is within. Heaven isn't a place, neither is hell. But we can certainly create hell for ourselves, can't we?
I have come to let things go by looking at things as lack of intelligence.
Exactly. Exactly.
Whether I had the lack of intelligence to do something differently, to bring about a different result, bring attention to a situation, or they have the lack of intelligence to recognize the truth, compassion. There's just so much here on earth, lack of intelligence, that's causing so many issues. And we get mad about all those issues, but at the end of the day, I just kind of look at it as, well, instead of getting mad, they need to stop doing that. Well, that's lack of intelligence. Then let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, to let go the judgment that they should be doing anything differently. And that is absolute trust, that nothing needs to be different than how it is.
Because we all will have our own judgment day.
And that's one of the things I ask, is there a judgment day? And the answers that I got was no judgment day. What there is a life review. And in that life review, not only do we experience, well, let me just tell you the way Jerry says it, because he describes it so well. It's nothing like you could ever imagine from the perspective of an individuated being. As I reviewed every moment of my physical life, I experienced how I felt and how I affected everyone and everything around me from their perspective. I experienced myself through them. I shared their thoughts and felt their feelings, people, animals, plants, and all sentient life. And how do you put that into words? So when I review my life, and I'm reviewing this moment, I will be in your skin with your thoughts, with your feelings, experiencing this. And I will know how I have impacted you. Also, the plants that are here, I will perceive myself through them and know how was my energy affecting them and impacting them. This is such a divine choreography. It is so divine. There is not one thing out of place. I know that seems like such a stretch, but it's true. It's true. My mother, in her life review, if I may share with you briefly, she said, during my life review, I began to see how rich and full my physical life had been. So many people had participated in my life, people I'd hardly known. I saw how afraid I'd been and how fear had kept me from connecting with and learning about them. I categorized people. I labeled them and judged them. I thought, why get to know him? He's just the person behind the meat counter, or she's just a receptionist doing her job. I don't need to give her the time of day. I saw these people regularly and knew their faces, but I never bothered to learn their names because of my judgments. And then I go on to say that, you know, I could relate to that. When I wrote the book, I could relate to that. You know, since then, since writing this, it's gotten to the point where when I'm going out to do errands, yes, there's an errand in mind. There are results that I'm wanting to produce. There are items at the grocery store that I'm wanting to pick up, but that's not my priority. My priority is the quality of connections I'm making along the way, what I'm observing, what I can recognize and acknowledge about the people that are serving me. And it's about, how do I bring this light and awaken the light within others as I move through the world? And sometimes it's not through words, it's just through a quality of being. Now, if I'm totally focused on what I'm here to do is get a bottle of ketchup, I'm not going to be focused on the quality of the connection. But through my mother sharing that with me, that began to change, you know, how I was interacting in the world, even standing in line at the grocery store. I remember when it first hit me, I was standing in line at the grocery store and I was thinking, wow, when I do my life review, all these people standing around me, I'm going to revisit this, and I'm going to know how my energy, even though I'm not talking to anybody, how my energy is impacting them. And how, if I'm going to do that, then let me do it well now so that I can enjoy it again a second time, as opposed to, you know, have to learn something about how I was constricted in my beingness. Let me open now. Let me be as open as I can be now. So that definitely was a waker-upper for me.
Before we run out of time, I want to know if you would touch on the thing with the prison that you're involved in. I thought that was fascinating.
Yes, thank you for asking about that. So I was from 2006 to 2008 doing a master's program in spiritual psychology in Los Angeles. And once you graduate from that program, you can become part of a team of graduates who go into a maximum security prison and share the principles and practices of spiritual psychology with the women in the prison. It was such an incredible, I did it for a decade until just before COVID. And we would go twice a year for 3 to 4 days. We would be, we'd stay at a hotel and come into the prison on a daily basis. And there were 75 or so people, usually on the team. And we were there to be of service, to share what we had discovered about our own true essence.
And this is the women's
maximum security women's prison. And one of the women in the prison had actually written to Ron Holnick, the president at the University of Santa Monica, and had requested, I don't know how she heard about it, but she had requested a workshop. And so the first workshop took place. I think there were only probably about 25 or 30 people that were there, that were from the master's program. And then there were probably a couple of hundred women. And we would form trios. And somebody would share, and somebody would listen, and somebody would be the neutral observer. And in that space of sharing and of receiving unconditionally, because we didn't see them as different from us. These were women as divine as myself, as divine as anybody on the team. There was no distinction. They had simply made choices that had resulted in the universe giving them information that led to being in prison. And the first, if I could just share with you, my first experience of being at the prison. So there were 75 of us on the team, and we were working with about 300 women in the gym in this trio format. And we're teaching, we're modeling certain skills and like the ability to listen without judgment, the ability to see the divine within someone else. And so lunchtime came, and we eat with the women, and we're the only group of people that came in that did that. Most
You eat prison food?
No, we would bring our own food.
I was gonna say.
Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
I used to work at a women's maximum. I never eat that food.
No. Well, we weren't. That wasn't part of the. I guess we weren't allowed to even. But
oh, okay.
Yeah, but we had a couple of people on the team, and that was their job. Was, you know, when they weren't in trio format working, they would prepare the meal when the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, so that the team could come in and grab a sandwich and then go and sit with the women. And in this particular format, because we were in the gym, the women would sit out on the lawn or at a table outside. And I remember very distinctly, I went to the food line and I got my sandwich. It was on a paper plate with some celery sticks. And I remember my hands were shaking as I looked out on the yard. And I wasn't shaking because I was in a prison or I was afraid because I was in a prison. My hands were shaking because I had social anxiety. And it didn't matter whether I was in a prison or at a party, I have social anxiety. And I felt so uncomfortable not knowing, you know, like how to be in a social setting. I had a lot of trauma around social settings as a kid. And so anyway, I'm standing there, my hands are shaking. I look out on the yard and I said, Spirit, show me where to sit. And there, I opened my eyes and I saw this one woman sitting by herself at a cement table with a cement bench. And I walked over to her and I said, may I join you? And she said, yes. She said, a couple of minutes passed and she said, I've been in isolation for 3 months because my son committed suicide. And my religion tells me that he's burning in hell. I said, oh, thank you, Spirit, because I was writing my book at that time and I had my conversations with Bill. And I had asked Bill, was there a penalty for taking your life? And he said, well, I'll tell you in a minute what he said. But I said to this woman, we'll call her Jane. I said, Jane, it's no accident that I'm sitting here. I know this is going to sound weird, but I'm writing a book and I talk to people on the other side. And one of the people I talked to was my friend Bill. And he committed suicide. Would you like to know what he said? And she said, oh, yes. And I began to share with her what he had said. I found out later, she shared with when we got back, you know, participants can raise their hand and speak on the mic and everybody listens. And she took the mic and she said, I had enough drugs to commit suicide this weekend. I was going to take my life this weekend if I didn't get an answer to my prayer. And I got my answer. And I said to her, would you like me to send you the pages? The book wasn't even published. I said, would you like me to send you the pages from Bill? She said, oh, please. So I sent them to her. And she started a survivors of suicide group in the prison.
Wow.
And the group kept growing and I kept sending by that time I had copies of when I had copies of the book, I would send copies of the book, and it got to where there were 30 women in this survivors of suicide group. And then Jane said, Irene, we'd really like to make a quilt and to have each woman have one square dedicated to their loved one who committed suicide. Can you help? And I got permission from powers that be that they could receive these materials. I went to Joann's Fabrics and I got hundreds of dollars worth of materials. And the woman there, when I told her what it was for, they were giving me all kinds of discounts here and discounts there, you know. And then my friend who was a flight attendant said, I get FedEx for a discount. We shipped all that stuff out, and they made the most beautiful quilt that Jane brought it to one of our weekends, and she brought that quilt as a testament.
They allowed them scissors and needles.
I don't think there were scissors and needles in the package that I sent. So they must have had
some kind of control.
Yeah, it was controlled, but I didn't send scissors and sharp objects, but there was glitter and cloth and all kinds of things. And they figured out what to do with all of that and got it into a quilt. So, so there you have divine intervention. She was going to commit suicide. And if I could just finish with this, Peggy.
Sure.
A couple of things. When I asked Bill, my first question was, what did you experience when you released your last breath on earth? But almost my next question was there a penalty for taking your life? And Bill says, if by penalty you mean was I punished? The answer is no. There's no such thing as punishment. Who would we punish? Who would do the punishing? You're the only one who can punish yourself. And when you do, you affect everyone. We all choose to end our physical lives. It's just a matter of when and how. There's no such thing as ending life too soon or too late. Life is filled with endings and beginnings, and they're all in harmony. And then Jerry steps in and he says, you choose all the changes in your life, including the death of your physical body. Death through natural causes is still your choice. And I say, why the quotes around natural? And Jerry answers, there are people whose deaths aren't considered suicide, yet they've dedicated themselves to resisting life and ignoring their body's needs for nutrition, hydration, and exercise, actively sabotaging the organs of their bodies by smoking, drinking, and abusing drugs. These choices are contrary to the health and well-being of the body. When these people take their final breath in physical form, no one calls it suicide. They call it lung cancer or alcoholism or drug addiction. These aren't natural, yet we call it dying of natural causes. These are prolonged suicides. The ways people choose to end their lives are as varied as the individuals. Some are more deliberate than others. And he goes on, I asked, well, why is there so much condemnation and shame associated with suicide, particularly in religion? And he says the original reason was to discourage people from choosing this option. And it was done in much the same way a parent threatens to punish a child for running into the street instead of explaining why running into the street is a harmful, self-defeating act. If religious institutions were more educational in nature, people could be educated in the truth about suicide. Suicide isn't wrong, it's an option. And that option could be put side by side with many other options. To create another body and grow that body to maturation takes a lot of time and energy that could be spent in the present body, healing the root causes of loneliness, isolation, and despair that brought the person to the decision of suicide. And then from that point of healing, the person could carry on with their soul's mission, perhaps gaining insight and wisdom to help others through the process of choosing differently. This would create a productive life, which is the goal of everyone who chooses a physical life. And for those listeners who you may have or viewers who feel that they had a loved one commit suicide and they could have, would have, should have done something differently, and that would have saved their loved one's action of committing suicide. I will tell you what Bill said here. I say, what would you say to someone who's had a loved one commit suicide and thinks that if only they had said this or done that, they could have prevented it? And Bill says, a person contemplating suicide feels isolated, alone, and afraid. They've constructed what they think is a protective enclosure, but it's actually a confinement that reinforces their feelings of isolation. They have to be willing to create an opening within that enclosure for family and friends to enter. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. And I say, I've often heard it said that you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, but it's never been as clear as it is now. I look forward to sharing this information with my friend Denise. She was scheduled to have dinner with her brother Dan, but she had to cancel at the last minute. Dan committed suicide. Denise felt guilty. She thought that if only she hadn't canceled, Dan would still be alive. And Bill says, even if she'd had dinner with him, Dan still would have had to be willing to create an opening in order for her to have made a difference. If he'd been willing to create an opening, someone, in this case Denise, would have stepped in. And even if she hadn't, someone else would have. Something as simple as a smile or a kind word from somebody would have made the difference. Everything is orchestrated. If Dan had needed someone's assistance to guide him in a new direction, someone would have been there. There is always a response to our needs. Had he been open to such a change, there would have been no way Denise could have canceled. The universe would have responded to the opening. We are not in this alone. And remember, no person is responsible for the actions of another. And in closing, I just want to say, my most favorite quote from Jerry is, there is no wrong way to do life.
Well, thank you, Irene.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.